My name is Melody, and I am 34 years old. My mother forgot my 5-year-old daughter at the mall for 3 hours because she was busy buying gifts for my sister's kids. Security found her crying alone. She was fine. Stop overreacting, my mother told me. The following night, I made one call. Minutes later, 58 missed calls. By midnight, they were at my door. Until a brisk Tuesday afternoon in December, I believed familial love had a baseline of basic decency. I believed that even a deeply flawed grandmother would possess the fundamental human instinct to keep a 5-year-old child safe in a crowded public space. I was wrong. My family dynamic was far darker than simple favoritism. It was a callous disregard for anything outside their immediate desires. My mother Beverly had always placed my younger sister Chelsea on an unreachable pedestal. While I built my career quietly, Chelsea lived loudly, funded by my mother's supposedly endless wealth. I tolerated the insults and financial favoritism because I wanted my daughter Lily to have a relationship with her grandmother. That lingering sense of duty evaporated the second my phone rang while I was in the middle of a quarterly review meeting. The caller ID showed a local mall security office. The voice on the other end was gruff, laced with a pity that made my blood run cold. They had my daughter. She was safe, but she had been found wandering near the south exit doors entirely alone. I do not remember leaving my office or navigating the congested holiday traffic. My memory only kicks in the moment my sensible work shoes hit the polished tile of the sprawling shopping center. The mall was a chaotic nightmare of holiday shoppers, loud festive music, and towering displays of fake snow and twinkling lights. To anyone else, it was a winter wonderland. To me, it was a terrifying maze where my fragile child had been lost. I sprinted past a line of people waiting for a photo with Santa Claus, dodging strollers and massive shopping bags. My lungs burned with every breath, and a cold sweat coated my neck. The distance to the security office felt like miles. Every face I passed blurred into a meaningless wash of colors. The upbeat holiday pop songs blasting from the overhead speakers sounded like a cruel joke, mocking my sheer panic. I pushed faster, my mind spiraling into horrific scenarios of what could happen to a 5-year-old girl wandering alone near multiple exits. I reached the unmarked hallway tucked between a high-end department store and a food court. The corridor was dimly lit and eerily quiet compared to the consumer frenzy just feet away. At the end of the hall, a heavy wooden door bore a stark plaque that read, "Security and Lost and Found." My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely turn the brass handle. I shoved my weight against the heavy wood and burst into the sterile, brightly lit room. The contrast between the festive chaos outside and the clinical silence of the security office was jarring. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. My eyes frantically scanned the small space, passing over banks of glowing security monitors and a cluttered reception desk. Then I saw her. Sitting on an oversized plastic chair in the corner was my beautiful little girl. Lily looked incredibly small, her legs dangling inches above the linoleum floor. Her face was blotchy red and streaked with dried tears. Her dark curls were tangled, sticking to her damp cheeks. In her small, trembling hands, she clutched a half-melted cherry lollipop that someone had given her as a consolation prize. The moment she saw me, the lollipop fell to the floor with a sticky thud. Her lower lip quivered, and a fresh wave of tears spilled over her eyelashes. "Mommy!" she sobbed, sliding off the chair and running toward me on unsteady legs. I dropped to my knees so hard, the impact sent a shockwave up my spine, but I did not care. I pulled her small, shaking body into a desperate, crushing embrace. I buried my face in her messy curls, inhaling the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with the sweat of pure panic. "I am here, baby," I whispered over and over, my own tears finally falling. "Mommy is right here. You are safe. I have you." I held her until her ragged breathing began to slow, rocking her back and forth on the cold floor of the security office. A tall security guard wearing a crisp blue uniform stepped out from behind the reception desk. His name tag read Officer Higgins. He held a clipboard in his hands, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and genuine parental concern. Miss, he began softly, giving me a moment to stand up, while keeping Lily securely perched on my hip. Are you the mother? Yes, I choked out, clearing my throat to find my voice. I am named Melody. Thank you for calling me. Thank you for keeping her safe. Where was she? Officer Higgins sighed heavily, looking down at his notes. One of our roaming patrols found her near the main south exit doors. She was crying and asking strangers if they had seen her grandma. We brought her in and reviewed the security footage to try and locate the adult she came with. What he said next made the remaining blood drain from my face. We traced her movements backward through the cameras. Officer Higgins explained, his voice growing tighter. Your daughter was sitting on a bench near the carousel for over an hour. After that, she started wandering. Based on the timestamp when she was first separated from her guardian, she was completely unattended for just over 3 hours. 3 hours. The words echoed in the small room, deafening in their implications. 3 hours in a mall packed with thousands of strangers. 3 hours where anyone could have taken her hand and walked her right out those south exit doors into the freezing December afternoon. My panic, the blinding, breathless terror that had fueled my sprint through the mall, evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a sensation so cold and sharp it felt like swallowing ice. I looked at Lily, who had finally stopped crying and rested her exhausted head heavily on my shoulder. She was safe, but the magnitude of the negligence was staggering. Beverly had not simply lost track of her granddaughter for a few minutes in a busy store. She had left a 5-year-old child sitting alone on a public bench and walked away for 3 entire hours. This was not a minor slip of the mind. This was a catastrophic, deliberate abandonment. The protective maternal instinct within me hardened into something entirely different. The years of making excuses for my mother, the decades of absorbing her subtle cruelties and financial favoritism, vanished into thin air. I had always accepted being the scapegoat to keep the peace. I had allowed them to treat my career as a joke and my life as a disappointment. But endangering my child was the ultimate unforgivable transgression. I stood perfectly still in that sterile office, holding my daughter tightly, as a profound and terrifying clarity washed over me. The old Melody, the accommodating, quiet daughter who took the high road, died in that room. In her place, a cold, calculating strategist emerged. My family had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. They thought I was weak, a pushover who would always bow her head and accept their mistreatment just to maintain a fragile illusion of our happy family forever. Before I could even formulate the first words of my new reality, the heavy wooden door of the security office swung open. My mother, Beverly, stepped into the fluorescent light of the small room. She was 60 years old, but spent a small fortune ensuring she looked at least a decade younger. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, not a single strand out of place despite the winter wind outside. Her cashmere coat was pristine, draped elegantly over her shoulders. She was not breathless from a frantic sprint through the mall. She did not have the wide, panicked eyes of a grandmother who had just been informed that her grandchild was missing. She did not rush forward to gather Lily into her arms. Instead, she stood in the doorway, her posture rigid, looking profoundly and unmistakably annoyed by the entire situation. What caught my attention, what made the breath catch in my throat and turn my blood to ice, were her hands. She was not wringing them in worry. The crooks of her elbows and her manicured fingers were weighed down by 6 massive, glossy shopping bags. They bore the bold logos of the most expensive luxury children boutiques in the mall. Thick rope handles cut into her wrists from the sheer weight of her purchases, but she held them with a grip of absolute determination. The crisp, high-end paper rustled loudly in the quiet room as she shifted her weight from one designer boot to the other. She looked like a woman who had just conquered a major holiday sale, not a woman who had abandoned her flesh and blood in a crowd of strangers. She took one look at me kneeling on the floor, with Lily sobbing into my shoulder, and she let out a long, theatrical sigh. She actually rolled her eyes, shaking her head, as if we were a massive inconvenience that had interrupted her perfect afternoon. Oh, please, Melody, stop being so dramatic. She was sitting by the carousel perfectly fine. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Perfectly fine. I looked at Lily, whose small hands were still gripping my shirt with a desperate white-knuckled intensity. My little girl was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering her chest, heaving with silent hiccups from crying for so long. She was the absolute picture of childhood terror. I looked back at my mother, searching her face for even a flicker of guilt, a shadow of remorse, or a single ounce of maternal instinct. There was nothing. Just cold, irritated impatience. She walked further into the cramped office and carefully set her designer shopping bags on the only empty chair. She treated the cardboard with a delicate reverence that she had not extended to my traumatized child. Officer Higgins cleared his throat, stepping forward with his clipboard tightly grasped in his hands. The professional composure he had maintained with me briefly cracked, revealing a flash of pure, unfiltered disgust. Madame, he began, his voice dropping an octave to convey the gravity of the situation. Your granddaughter was not perfectly fine. She was not sitting by the carousel. She was found crying hysterically near the south exit doors. Anyone could have walked out with her. She was unsupervised for over 3 hours. We were moments away from calling the police department and initiating a mall-wide lockdown. Beverly turned to the security guard, her expression shifting to one of haughty condescension. She waved her manicured hand in the air, as if swatting away a pesky fly. I told her to stay on the bench near the carousel. While I went into the boutique, my mother said, her tone dripping with arrogant justification. She knows the rules. If she wandered off, that is a discipline issue, not a security crisis. Children need to learn how to follow simple instructions. I was literally right inside the store. It is not my fault she decided to go for a walk. She is old enough to sit still for a few minutes. The boutique she was referring to was on the opposite end of the concourse, separated from the carousel by a sea of kiosks, food vendors, and hundreds of rushing shoppers. A few minutes was a blatant lie, and she knew it. She had parked my 5-year-old daughter on a public bench, like a piece of unwanted luggage. Do you have any idea how long the lines were at the boutiques today? Beverly complained, gesturing toward the bags. It was absolute madness out there. Chelsea asked me specifically to get those limited edition designer coats for the twins. You know how your sister is about her boys having the best of everything for the holiday photos. She ignored the fact that Lily was shrinking against my chest. They sold out online in 3 minutes, Melody. 3 minutes. I had to stand in line behind 20 other women just to secure the right sizes. It was exhausting. I have been on my feet all afternoon fighting through crowds just to make sure the twins have a magical holiday. And instead of thanking me for helping out, I get called into a security office like a common criminal because you never taught your child how to sit quietly and wait. The golden child dynamic had always been present in our family, but it had never been displayed with such terrifying clarity. Chelsea was the favorite, the one who had married well, and provided my mother with the picture-perfect grandchildren that fit her affluent aesthetic. My daughter and I were the obligations she tolerated to maintain her public image. She prized the luxury coats for the twin boys over the actual physical safety of my little girl. She was willing to risk losing Lily today so that the holiday photos would look flawless on social media. Beverly crossed her arms. Honestly, Melody, if you had a proper career instead of sitting at home doing basic computer work, you could afford a real nanny. But no, you expect me to drop my busy schedule to watch your child for free. You dump her on me when I have important errands to run, and then you act like a hysterical victim when a minor misunderstanding happens. If your ex was not a deadbeat, you would not be bitter. I remained kneeling on the floor holding my daughter. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not defend my parenting or my child. I just listened to the toxic venom that poured from her mouth. I listened as she justified child endangerment with holiday shopping. I watched as she prioritized her own convenience and her golden child over the very life of my daughter. The profound betrayal settled deep into my bones, freezing any lingering affection I held for the woman standing above me. Her arrogance was a shield, but it was also a massive, gaping vulnerability. She had no idea who she was talking to. She truly believed I was a struggling, helpless single mother who relied on her conditional charity. She believed she held all the power in our family dynamic. She believed she could treat me and my daughter as disposable assets without facing any real consequences. The sheer audacity of her complaints echoed in the small room. She sighed again, reaching down to adjust one of the luxury shopping bags that had tilted slightly on the chair. "Well, are we going to sit here all day, or are you going to get up so we can leave?" she snapped. "I need to deliver these luxury coats to Chelsea before her husband gets home from work. They are hosting a pre-opening dinner tonight and I cannot be late." I looked at the shopping bags. I looked at the gold watch. I looked at the cold, impatient expression on her face. The trap was already set in my mind. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew how satisfying it would be to watch her entire world crumble. Officer Higgins kept his body angled between Beverly and the exit, but he no longer repeated the warning he had already given. Instead, he reached behind the reception desk and pulled a formal incident form from a metal tray. "I am documenting exactly what happened," he said. "The footage shows the child was left without adult supervision for more than 3 hours and later wandered toward an exterior exit. The report will include the timestamps, the patrol officer's statement, and the preserved camera footage." For the first time, Beverly's confidence cracked. She stared at the form as if the paper itself had insulted her. "You are not putting my name into some ridiculous report," she snapped. "I spend thousands of dollars in this mall. I know members of the management board. If you try to make me look like a criminal, your supervisor will hear from my attorney before you finish your shift." Officer Higgins did not react to the threat. He simply wrote Beverly's full name on the top line. "You may contact mall management or legal counsel. That does not change what the cameras recorded." He then looked at me. "Ms. Melody, I can contact the police and request an officer now, or I can complete the mall incident report and provide you with the reference number. Either way, the footage will be retained." I felt Lily tighten her arms around my neck. She had already endured enough uniforms questions and fear for one afternoon. "Do not call anyone else while she is here," I said quietly. "But preserve every minute of the footage. I want the incident number, the names of the officers who found her, and written confirmation of how long she was alone." Officer Higgins nodded and tore a carbon copy from the form. Beverly stared at me with open outrage, apparently more offended by the existence of a record than by the danger Lily had faced. I folded the copy once and slipped it into my coat pocket. I did not yet know whether I would need it for a school safety order, a custody file, or a future boundary dispute. I only knew that my mother would never again be able to rewrite this afternoon as a harmless misunderstanding. When the guard simply crossed his arms, Beverly turned her wrath back onto me. "This is exactly what I am talking about, Melody," she snapped, her tone dripping with venom. "You are sitting there on a dirty floor crying and putting on this pathetic display, and now you have the security staff thinking I am a monster. You are embarrassing me." I kept my arms securely wrapped around Lily. I did not say a word. The silence seemed to infuriate my mother even more. She paced the small expanse of the office, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. "Chelsea kids actually appreciate nice things," Beverly continued, pointing a manicured finger at the luxury shopping bags. "They know that when their grandmother is trying to do something special for them, they need to cooperate. I spent hours trying to secure those designer coats for your nephews. You know how stressful holiday shopping is. It requires focus and strategy. But you would not understand that." She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "You are overreacting because you are a single mother who hovers too much. You project your own insecurities onto your child. Maybe if you had managed to keep a husband, you would not be so neurotic. You treat Lily like she is made of glass because she is the only thing you have going for you. Look at her crying over a simple miscommunication. You are raising her to be a victim just like you." The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the sterile air of the security office. In a typical family drama, this would be the moment the protagonist breaks down. This would be the moment I would scream, cry, and defend my parenting. For 34 years, that was the script I had followed. I had spent my entire life trying to explain myself to a woman committed to misunderstanding me. But applying logic to toxicity is a useless endeavor. I finally understood the power of silence. The less I reacted, the more agitated she became. My lack of an emotional outburst robbed her of the fuel she needed to play the victim. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed another tear. I simply looked at her, seeing her not as my mother, but as a dangerous liability that I was about to surgically remove from my life. I gently pushed myself up from the floor, bringing Lily to her feet beside me. I smoothed down my daughter's messy curls and wiped the remaining dried tears from her flushed cheeks. "Are you ready to go home, sweetie?" I asked softly, my voice completely steady. Lily nodded, rubbing her eyes with the back of her small hand. I picked up her winter coat and carefully helped her slip her arms into the sleeves, making sure it was zipped up tight against the December chill. "Melody, are you even listening to me?" Beverly demanded, taking a step toward us. "I expect an apology for this entire ordeal. I have a very important dinner to attend tonight for Derek's new restaurant, and my mood is completely ruined." I took Lily's small hand in mine. Her fingers were still a little cold, but her grip was strong and trusting. I turned to Officer Higgins, giving him a polite, sincere nod. "Thank you again for keeping my daughter safe. I truly appreciate your professionalism today." He nodded back, his eyes conveying a silent understanding of the dysfunctional nightmare he had just witnessed. Then I turned to face my mother. I looked at her perfectly styled hair, her expensive cashmere coat, and the heavy gold jewelry glittering on her wrists. I looked at the 6 massive luxury shopping bags piled high on the plastic chair, representing thousands of dollars spent on my sister's children, while my own child had been discarded on a mall bench. I felt no anger anymore. I felt only the cold, precise calculation of a private equity manager preparing to liquidate a toxic asset. "I hope Chelsea's kids enjoy those gifts, Mom," I said, delivering the words with a chillingly calm, even tone. "It is the last time you will be able to afford them." My mother froze. Her mouth opened slightly, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. She had expected a screaming match. She had expected me to cry about the single mother insult. She had not expected a serene, almost pleasant warning. "What on earth are you talking about?" she scoffed, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You are speaking nonsense. Are you threatening me, Melody? You, the girl doing data entry from her living room, are threatening my finances. That is absolutely ridiculous. Do not make a fool of yourself." I did not offer an explanation. I did not give her the satisfaction of another word. I simply turned my back on her and walked toward the heavy wooden door of the security office. I pushed it open, stepping out of the clinical silence and back into the vibrant, chaotic noise of the holiday shopping rush. The festive music swelled around us as Lily and I walked down the dim corridor and emerged into the main concourse. Behind me, I could hear my mother scoffing loudly, muttering complaints to the security guard about my dramatic exits and my ungrateful attitude. I did not look back. I held my daughter's hand tightly, weaving our way through the crowds toward the parking garage. The cold winter air hit my face as we stepped outside, feeling refreshing and clean. I secured Lily in her car seat, wrapping her favorite blanket around her legs. As I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, I felt a profound sense of peace. The game was over and it was time to collect the board. The drive back to our downtown apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and the gentle rhythm of Lily breathing in the back seat. The winter sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows across the skyline. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my mind operating with a newfound clarity. I ordered a comforting meal for Lily the moment we walked through our front door. I ran her a warm bubble bath, read her 2 storybooks, and tucked her into bed. I watched her chest rise and fall until I was certain she was asleep and feeling safe again. I called Maria, my reliable neighbor, asking her to sit in the living room for an hour. I explained that I had to run an unavoidable errand. Maria took one look at my face, asked no questions, and simply nodded, taking a seat on the sofa. I grabbed my keys, descended to the parking garage, and began the 30-minute drive to the affluent suburbs where my mother lived. I needed to collect Lily's overnight bag. She had been scheduled to spend the weekend with Beverly, a plan that now felt like a disaster. The suburban neighborhood where my mother resided was an exclusive gated community that prided itself on manicured lawns and professional holiday lights. Massive oak trees lined the pristine streets leading up to Beverly's custom-built estate. The wide circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. My sister Chelsea's white SUV was parked near the front stone steps alongside Derek's sleek sports car. I parked my modest sedan at the very end of the driveway near the street. The stark contrast in our vehicles was a visual representation of how they viewed our places in the family hierarchy. I walked up the stone pathway, my boots making soft crunching sounds against the thin layer of frost that had settled on the ground. I still had my spare key. I slipped it into the heavy mahogany door and turned the lock, pushing the door open silently. The moment I stepped into the grand marble-floored foyer, the sound of loud, joyous laughter echoed down the hallway. It was followed by the distinct chime of crystal champagne glasses clinking together in celebration. The rich scent of catered food wafted through the warm air, heavy with roasted garlic and seared meats. I slipped off my winter coat and walked toward the formal dining room, the source of the loud celebration. I paused in the wide, arched doorway of the dining room, taking in the opulent scene before me. The long mahogany table was set for a massive feast, adorned with an extravagant floral centerpiece. A professional caterer, in a crisp white uniform, was quietly pouring vintage champagne into delicate flutes. In the center of the room, my mother sat at the head of the table, still wearing her cashmere coat from the mall, looking like a queen holding court. To her right sat my younger sister, Chelsea. At 31, Chelsea was the absolute embodiment of suburban perfection, wearing a tailored silk dress and diamonds that caught the light from the massive crystal chandelier overhead. Next to her was her husband, Derek, 33 years old, and leaning back in his chair with the smug posture of a man who believed the world owed him everything. They were in the middle of a grand toast. Derek was holding his glass high, a wide, arrogant smile plastered across his face. To my incredible mother-in-law, he announced, his voice booming with artificial charm and confidence. Without your generous investments, the grand opening of my new luxury fusion restaurant simply would not be happening tomorrow night. You are making our biggest dreams come true, Beverly. We owe you everything. Chelsea beamed brightly, leaning over to kiss her mother on the cheek. You are the best, Mom. We are so lucky to have you backing us up. I stood there for a long moment, simply observing the sheer depth of their delusion. They were celebrating a massive financial venture built entirely on a foundation of shifting sand funded by money my mother did not possess. Beverly raised her glass, soaking in the endless praise and adoration she had essentially purchased from her golden child. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes sweeping across the elegant room until they landed heavily on me standing in the doorway. Her triumphant smile vanished instantly. The warmth in her eyes turned into a cold glare of absolute disdain. Chelsea and Derek followed her gaze, their joyous laughter abruptly dying out as they spotted me hovering in the shadows. The sudden silence in the grand dining room was incredibly heavy and deeply suffocating. The caterer, sensing the sudden shift in the family atmosphere, quickly stepped back and vanished into the kitchen without a single word. Not a single person sitting at that extravagant table bothered to ask how Lily was doing. No one inquired if my little daughter had recovered from the intense trauma of being lost in a massive mall for 3 agonizing hours. No one asked if she was resting safely at home in her bed. Their only reaction to my unexpected presence was profound irritation that I had rudely interrupted their private celebration of wealth and status. Beverly said, finally setting her flute down onto the polished wood table with a sharp clink. I see you simply decided to let yourself in without knocking. Did you come back to apologize for your embarrassing behavior earlier, or are you just here to ruin our peaceful dinner? I walked into the dining room, keeping my posture straight and my expression neutral. I came to get my daughter's overnight bag, I said, maintaining direct eye contact with my mother. I left it in the guest bedroom this morning when I dropped her off. I will grab it quickly and be completely out of your way. Chelsea let out a harsh sigh, rolling her eyes as she leaned back in her expensive chair. Melody, you have some serious nerve showing your face here tonight. Mom told us about the ridiculous tantrum you threw at the mall security office. It is incredibly embarrassing for our family. You acted like a complete lunatic over a minor misunderstanding, Derek chimed in, swirling the champagne in his glass while looking at me with undisguised pity. You really need to get a firm grip on reality, Melody. Mom was trying to do something nice for our boys, securing those designer coats for our holiday photos. She stepped away for a few short minutes, and you made a massive federal case out of it. You are lucky she even offered to watch your kid in the first place. The audacity of their warped perspective was staggering, but I refused to take the bait. I looked at my sister, taking in her smug, self-satisfied expression. 3 hours, Chelsea. I said, my voice flat and quiet. She left a 5-year-old child alone in a crowded public space for 3 full hours. It was not a few minutes. It was blatant child endangerment. Chelsea waved her hand dismissively, unbothered by the terrifying fact I had just presented. Oh, please stop exaggerating. Lily was perfectly fine. Mom said she was just sitting quietly by the carousel playing with her toys. You are always playing the miserable victim, Melody. You do basic data entry from your home computer. You sit at a desk all day in your old sweatpants. You do not understand the intense pressure Mom is under right now. She is helping us launch a real business in the city. She is actively managing high-level investments and real estate portfolios for our entire family's future. You cannot expect her to treat free babysitting like it is her primary full-time job. You are just bitterly jealous because Mom is financially backing a legitimate venture instead of funding whatever small, quiet life you are trying to lead. I listened to my sister speak, fascinated by how disconnected from reality she was. She believed my mother was a brilliant financial mastermind pulling strings behind the scenes. She thought I was a struggling remote worker scraping by on pennies and hoping for handouts. They spent years mocking my quiet private lifestyle, mistaking my lack of flashy designer clothes for sad, desperate poverty. They needed me to be a failure so they could feel like an overwhelming success. Derek leaned forward, placing his elbows heavily on the mahogany table, looking at me as if I were a pathetic charity case that had overstayed her welcome. The hostile atmosphere in the elegant room thickened rapidly, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. They were gearing up for a massive fight, eager to tear me down to protect the Golden Child's narrative. I stood my ground, my face an unreadable mask, patiently waiting for them to play their next cruel card. Chelsea was the first to break the silence. She lowered her crystal champagne flute, tracing the rim with a manicured finger. A condescending smirk stretched across her face, highlighting the sharp contours of her carefully applied makeup. She looked at me not as a sister who had just endured a terrifying ordeal, but as an annoying pest that had crawled into her pristine dining room. Mom told us you threw quite the tantrum today at the mall, Chelsea said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. I honestly cannot believe you made a scene in front of mall security over a simple misunderstanding. She was just sitting on a bench, Melody. You always have to make everything into a massive theatrical production. It is exhausting to watch, too. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides, refusing to cross my arms or show any physical sign of defensiveness. Chelsea took my silence as an invitation to continue her lecture. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, looking at me with absolute pity. Seriously, Melody, you need to gain some perspective. You sit at a tiny desk in your apartment doing basic data entry from home. You type numbers into spreadsheets in your sweatpants. You have absolutely no idea how the real world operates. You do not understand the kind of intense, high-stakes pressure Mom is under right now. She is helping us launch a real business. She is coordinating vendors, managing contractors, and overseeing the financial backing for a luxury restaurant. Her time is incredibly valuable, and you are treating her like she is some hired teenage babysitter. The sheer confidence with which she delivered this delusional narrative was almost impressive. Chelsea truly believed every word she was saying. She genuinely thought I was a low-level clerk struggling to pay my electricity bill. She had spent the last decade assuming my quiet nature and lack of flashy designer labels meant I was barely scraping by. She needed to believe I was a failure because it made her feel exceptional. It justified her constant need for our mother's financial handouts. If she admitted that I was successful, she would have to face her own profound inadequacies. So she painted me as a bitter, dramatic loser, and my mother happily supplied the canvas. Derek shifted in his heavy wooden chair, the leather creaking loudly in the tense room. He puffed out his chest, clearly eager to join the assault. He was a man who wore his insecurities like a cheap suit, overcompensating with loud opinions and unearned arrogance. He pointed his fork at me, his face flushed with champagne and self-importance. "Look," Melody Derek chimed in, his tone harsh and unforgiving. "If you cannot afford to hire a real professional babysitter, then you should not go out. You definitely should not dump your kid on Beverly when she is busy managing our financial portfolio. Do you know how many meetings she had to attend this week to secure the final permits for my restaurant? She is handling hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you are whining because she turned her back for a couple of minutes to buy gifts for my nephews." Derek was just warming up. He took a large gulp of his champagne, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before continuing his tirade. "You need to take some personal responsibility for once in your life," he sneered. "It is not our fault that you are struggling. Maybe if your ex-husband was not such a deadbeat loser, you would not be so bitter and miserable all the time. Maybe if you had chosen a better partner, you would not have to beg your mother for free childcare so you can go run your little errands. But you made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Do not drag us down just because your life did not turn out the way you wanted it to. You are dragging down the energy of this entire family, and frankly, we are all sick and tired of carrying your emotional baggage." The mention of my ex-husband was a calculated low blow designed to provoke an emotional reaction. It was the same tired rhetoric they had used against me for years. They loved to weaponize my single mother status, twisting my independence into a tragic tale of abandonment and financial ruin. They loved to remind me that I was raising a child alone, as if it were a scarlet letter I should be deeply ashamed of wearing. In their shallow appearance-driven world, a woman without a wealthy husband was a woman without value. They equated financial dependence on a man with success. And because I had neither a husband nor their perceived notion of wealth, I was entirely worthless to them. I let Derek's harsh words wash over me, absorbing the insult without breaking eye contact. I watched a vein pulse slightly in his neck. He was getting worked up, feeding off his own manufactured outrage. Chelsea nodded vigorously in agreement with her husband, her diamond earrings catching the light as she moved. "Derek is absolutely right, Melody," she said, her voice adopting a sickeningly sweet, patronizing tone. "We are trying to build a legacy here. Derek's restaurant is going to be the premier dining destination in the entire city. The mayor is coming to the grand opening tomorrow night. Food critics from 3 different major publications are attending. We are dealing with high-level press and VIP guest lists. We cannot afford to have you bringing your toxic poverty mindset into our orbit. It brings everyone down. Every time you come around, you just complain and act like a victim. You need to grow up and realize that the world does not revolve around you and your mundane little problems. My boys understand this. They know that Grammy is a very important businesswoman now." My mother sat at the head of the table, basking in the glow of their fierce defense. She looked immensely satisfied, a faint smile playing on her lips, as she watched her golden child and her son-in-law tear me apart. She did not intervene to stop the cruelty. She did not suggest that Derek had gone too far by bringing up my ex-husband. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, lifting her glass in a silent toast to their shared superiority. She loved this dynamic. She thrived on it. Pitting her children against each other ensured that she remained the ultimate authority figure, the sole dispenser of approval and financial favor. By allowing them to attack me, she validated their delusions and cemented her own false narrative of being a wealthy, benevolent matriarch burdened by a difficult, ungrateful daughter. I continued to stand quietly in the arched doorway of the dining room. I focused on the slow, steady rhythm of my own breathing. In, out, In out. I was a spectator watching a bizarre, poorly written play. I looked at the extravagant floral centerpiece, the vintage champagne, the perfectly tailored clothes. It was all a grand, elaborate illusion. They were celebrating a mirage. They were inflating a massive balloon of arrogance that was entirely hollow inside. The sheer magnitude of their ignorance was almost breathtaking to behold. Derek believed he was a brilliant restaurateur, completely unaware that his commercial lease was currently sitting in a digital file folder on my personal laptop. Chelsea believed she was a high society socialite, completely oblivious to the fact that her lifestyle was funded by predatory loans that I personally controlled. And my mother, the great financial mastermind, was nothing more than a desperate woman drowning in hidden debt. I let the heavy silence stretch out after Chelsea finished speaking. I wanted them to feel the weight of their ugly words. I wanted their cruelty to hang in the air, undeniable and stark. I did not offer any defense of my career. I did not mention the private equity firm I built. I did not correct their assumptions about my bank account or my ability to afford a babysitter. Correcting them now would only give them an opportunity to pivot and attack me from a different angle. It was far more strategic, far more devastating to let their arrogance swell to its absolute breaking point. I watched as they exchanged confident glances with one another, deeply satisfied that they had put the family failure back in her rightful place. They thought they had won the battle. They had no idea the war was over. The silence did not last. Beverly placed her champagne flute on the table with exaggerated care and pushed back her chair. The legs scraped against the polished floor, a sharp sound that pulled every eye toward her. She crossed the room slowly, wearing the expression she used whenever she intended to turn cruelty into a lesson about gratitude. "You have made enough trouble for one day," she said. "Derek's grand opening is tomorrow night, and we are not allowing you to bring this mood into an important family event." Chelsea's smile widened. Derek leaned back in his chair, clearly relieved that Beverly was taking control again. They expected me to protest. They expected me to plead for an invitation to a room full of people they considered more valuable than me. Beverly opened her designer purse and searched through several compartments. "The press list is finalized," she continued. "There will be critics, investors, city officials, and people who actually matter to Derek's future. We cannot have you arriving in one of your plain work outfits, glaring at everyone, and talking about the mall, as if Mom committed some terrible crime," Chelsea added. "Tomorrow is supposed to be about success." "It is about the opening of my restaurant," Derek said. "I have spent months building relationships for this night. One bitter scene from you could destroy the atmosphere. Guests remember desperation. They can smell it." Beverly finally found what she wanted. She pulled out a crisp $50 bill, held it between two manicured fingers, and extended it toward me. The gesture was slow and theatrical, designed to make certain everyone at the table saw it. "Here," she said. "Take Lily somewhere inexpensive tomorrow night. Get her a hamburger, buy yourself something from the value menu, and stay home. Consider it my contribution since apparently everything is so difficult for you." For a moment, no one moved. The caterer had returned to the edge of the room carrying a silver tray, but stopped when he saw the bill suspended between us. Even he seemed embarrassed on my behalf. I looked at the money without reaching for it. Beverly's mouth tightened. "Do not stand there pretending you are too proud to accept help. You came here for a child's overnight bag because you cannot keep your life organized. You depend on other people constantly, and then you punish them when they fail to meet your impossible standards." "I came for Lily's bag because she will never spend another unsupervised minute with you," I said. The sentence landed harder than a shout. Beverly's hand jerked slightly, making the bill flutter. "You do not get to make dramatic declarations in my house," she replied. "I am her grandmother. You were her grandmother when you left her on a bench." Chelsea slammed her palm onto the table. "Stop saying it like that. Mom did not abandon her in the wilderness. It was a luxury mall with security everywhere." "She was 5, I said. "She did not know where you were. She did not know how to find me. She was close to an exterior door asking strangers for help. And she was found, Derek said. That is what security is for. His casual answer erased the last possibility that any of them understood what had happened. To them, Lily's terror was an acceptable inconvenience because the ending had not been catastrophic. They measured wrongdoing only by the damage that could be seen. A frightened child, a security report, and 3 missing hours did not count because Lily had returned physically unharmed. Beverly shoved the $50 bill closer to my chest. Take it and leave. I am finished discussing this. Tomorrow night, you are not welcome at the restaurant. Your poverty mindset, your resentment, and your constant need to create conflict will not ruin the most important evening of Derek and Chelsea's lives. I took the bill. Chelsea gave a satisfied little laugh. Derek lifted his glass as if Beverly had just won an argument on behalf of the entire room. My mother's shoulders relaxed. They believed the exchange had restored the natural order, Beverly dispensing charity, me accepting it, and Chelsea receiving the celebration. I smoothed the bill carefully between my fingers. Then I walked to the center of the mahogany table and placed it flat beside the champagne bottle. I ran one fingertip across the edge until it was perfectly straight. You misunderstand something I said. Beverly stared at the money. What could I possibly misunderstand? I do not need $50 from you. I do not need a babysitter from you. I do not need an invitation from you. Chelsea laughed again, but this time the sound was thinner. Then why are you still standing here? I looked past her toward Derek. Because you keep calling tomorrow a grand opening, but you have not earned the right to open anything. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. What is that supposed to mean? He demanded. It means imported marble does not make you solvent. A VIP guest list does not erase unpaid obligations. Champagne does not become operating capital merely because you serve it to important people. The color in Derek's face deepened. You know nothing about my finances. That is what you keep telling yourself. Beverly stepped between us. Enough. You are embarrassing yourself with vague threats. Derek has professional accountants, attorneys, and lenders. He does not need business advice from someone who types numbers into spreadsheets. I let a small smile form. It was not warm enough to reassure her. You are right about one thing I said. Tomorrow night should be about the people who made the restaurant possible. Chelsea folded her arms. Exactly. Mom invested in us. That is why she will be seated at the main table and you will not. Then I hope she enjoys the seat while she still has it. Beverly's face hardened. Melody, do not test me. I am not testing you. I am finally accepting the results. The room had gone completely quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a metal pan struck a counter and then was immediately silenced. Derek glanced at Chelsea, looking for confirmation that I was bluffing. Chelsea looked toward Beverly. Beverly kept staring at me, trying to identify the source of my composure. For years, they had interpreted my restraint as fear. They had never considered that silence could be strategic. I had protected them without recognition, absorbed their contempt without retaliation, and allowed them to believe their financial survival was the result of Beverly's brilliance. They had grown reckless inside the shelter I created. That shelter was about to disappear. Derek stood abruptly. Let me make this very clear. You are not attending my event. If you appear at the restaurant, security will remove you. Will they? I asked. Yes, he said. I control that property. No, I replied. You operate inside it. The distinction made him hesitate. Chelsea narrowed her eyes. Why are you speaking like that? Because ownership and appearance are not the same thing. You should remember that tomorrow. Beverly gave an impatient laugh, but her eyes had become cautious. This performance is pathetic. You are trying to frighten us because you cannot stand seeing your sister succeed. I am not trying to frighten you. Then what are you doing? Giving you notice that the way you treated Lily has consequences. My mother's expression twisted. You would punish an entire family because a child wandered away from the place she was told to sit? No. I am ending the protection I provided to adults who repeatedly chose appearances over responsibility. Derek took another step toward me. What protection? I did not answer. The question hung between us, small and dangerous. Beverly recovered first. This is exactly why you are excluded tomorrow. You bring threats, accusations, and instability wherever you go. Take your daughter, take the $50, and stay away from us until you can apologize. I glanced at the bill lying untouched on the table. Keep it, I said. You will need every dollar. Chelsea rolled her eyes, though I noticed she no longer looked amused. For what? For the expenses that begin when borrowed luxury stops pretending to be wealth. Beverly opened her mouth, but no words came out immediately. I turned toward the staircase. Lily's overnight bag was still in the guest bedroom, and I had no intention of spending another minute debating people who had already revealed everything important about themselves. Behind me, Derek called out, "You are banned from the restaurant." "Melody, do you understand?" I stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked back over my shoulder. "Do not worry, Derek. I would not miss your grand opening for the world." Chelsea scoffed. "Why would you come after being explicitly uninvited because an owner should always be present to check on her investment?" The room froze. Derek's mouth tightened into a contemptuous smile, but uncertainty flashed behind it. Chelsea searched my face. Beverly stared at the $50 bill as if it had suddenly become evidence in a case she did not understand. Then all three of them laughed. Their laughter followed me as I climbed the staircase, loud, confident, and completely unaware that it was the final sound they would make before learning who had actually paid for their illusion. I did not offer a single response or rebuttal to their incredibly smug declarations. I simply turned on my heel, walked up the grand sweeping staircase to the guest bedroom, and retrieved my daughter's overnight bag. The soft fabric of the duffel bag felt grounding in my hands. As I descended the stairs and walked back through the marble foyer, the loud sounds of their clinking glasses and self-congratulatory laughter echoed behind me. I quickly let myself out into the freezing December night. The extremely heavy mahogany front door clicked shut, severing the last thread of emotional attachment I held for the people celebrating inside. The drive back to the city was a blur of neon streetlights and dark, icy winter roads, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I pulled my sensible, modest sedan into the subterranean parking garage of a sleek, ultra-modern high-rise building in the city's financial district. I took the private high-speed elevator straight up to the top floor, stepping out directly into a stunning, expansive penthouse that featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering downtown skyline. Maria, my kind and reliable neighbor, was reading a book on my plush velvet sofa. I thanked her profusely, handing her a generous amount of cash for her time, far more than the $50 bill my mother had so insultingly tossed at me earlier. After Maria left, I walked quietly down the hallway to the master bedroom. I eased the door open and stood in the dim light, watching Lily sleep peacefully in the center of the massive king-sized bed. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, calming rhythm, entirely oblivious to the storm that was about to descend upon our extended family. Looking at her sweet, innocent face, my lingering hesitation evaporated completely. The maternal instinct to protect my child overrode the decades of conditioning that had taught me to absorb my family's abuse. I softly pulled the heavy door shut and walked straight into my home office. My office was not a makeshift desk in the corner of a living room, as Chelsea so ignorantly believed. It was a sophisticated command center. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and woke up my custom-built multi-monitor workstation. I am not a data entry clerk. I am a ruthless, highly sought-after forensic accountant and a senior managing partner at one of the most aggressive private equity firms in the city. I spend my days dismantling failing corporations, tracing hidden assets, and restructuring massive portfolios. My family had absolutely no idea about my actual career because they had never once bothered to ask about my personal life. They saw what they wanted to see: a quiet, unassuming single mother who wore plain clothes and drove a sensible car. They mistook my humility for failure and my desire for privacy as a symptom of poverty. I opened my primary laptop and authenticated my credentials through 2 layers of encrypted security. My personal financial dashboard loaded onto the center screen, displaying a multi-million-dollar portfolio that I had built completely in the shadows. I scrolled past my diversified index funds, my tech stocks, and my offshore holdings, navigating directly to the secure folder labeled with a blind limited liability company I had established 7 months ago. I clicked on the file containing the comprehensive financial records of my mother Beverly and my brother-in-law Derek. The truth of my family's so-called wealth was displayed before me in stark, unforgiving black and white. It was a fragile house of cards, waiting for a single gust of wind. Beverly was not the financial mastermind she desperately pretended to be. She had not built an empire from scratch. She had simply inherited a substantial but poorly structured trust fund from my late grandfather. For the past decade, she had been systematically mismanaging that trust, draining the principal to fund Chelsea's lavish lifestyle, expensive vacations, and an endless stream of luxury vehicles. My mother was secretly drowning in massive, unmanageable debt. To keep up appearances and maintain her status in her affluent social circles, she had resorted to desperate measures. 6 months ago, Derek came to her with his grand vision for a luxury fusion restaurant. He needed a massive injection of capital to secure a prime commercial lease in the trendy arts district and fund the extensive high-end renovations required. Because Beverly's trust was already dangerously depleted, she could not secure a traditional loan from a reputable bank. Instead, she took out a massive predatory commercial loan with an exorbitant interest rate using her sprawling suburban estate as collateral. She essentially bet the roof over her head on Derek's unproven ability to run a competitive restaurant in a ruthless culinary market. It was a catastrophic financial decision made entirely out of blind favoritism and a desperate need to keep up the appearance of limitless wealth. I had known about the reckless loan from the very beginning. My firm's risk assessment software flags large high-risk commercial debts in the local market, and Beverly's name had popped up on my radar. 3 months ago, the inevitable happened. Derek vastly overspent on his restaurant renovations, pouring money into imported Italian marble countertops and custom brass light fixtures blindly. He completely ignored his operational budget. He missed his first scheduled loan repayment, and then he missed his second. The predatory lender my mother had used was entirely unforgiving. They initiated the early stages of foreclosure. Beverly was weeks away from losing her grand suburban home, and Derek was about to be locked out of his half-finished restaurant. That was when I intervened. At the time, I still suffered from a lingering, foolish sense of familial duty. I still foolishly believed that protecting my mother from total financial ruin and public humiliation was the right thing to do. I did not want my sister's family to face bankruptcy even if they treated me poorly. So I authorized my private equity firm to quietly purchase the entire debt portfolio from the predatory lender. I transferred the debt into a blind limited liability company that I personally owned. I absorbed their massive financial risk entirely in secret. I became the sole legal owner of the mortgage on Beverly's house. I also became the sole legal holder of the commercial lease for Derek's restaurant. The monthly payments they thought they were sending to an anonymous, faceless corporate lender were actually being deposited directly into an escrow account controlled by my firm. I had restructured their debt to give them a silent grace period, allowing them to finish the restaurant renovations and open the doors without the immediate threat of foreclosure hanging over their heads. I had saved them from absolute destruction, and they had absolutely no idea I was their savior. They believed their financial genius had bought them more time. They believed their sheer brilliance had convinced the bank to back off. They had spent the entire evening mocking my supposed poverty and lecturing me. Derek had stood in that dining room flushed with champagne and unearned confidence, loudly bragging about his upcoming grand opening and VIP guest list, entirely unaware that the key to his front door belonged to the sister-in-law he was actively insulting. Chelsea had sneered at my basic apartment and my lack of ambition, completely oblivious to the fact that her mother's home, the very roof over her head, could be seized by me with a single phone call. I stared at the digitized contracts glowing on my high-resolution monitor. The legal language was ironclad, drafted by the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the city. The terms of the commercial lease and the residential mortgage were clear and brutally unforgiving. Derek had missed 3 consecutive payments to my limited liability company. He had diverted his operating capital to fund the extravagant catering and vintage champagne. He chose to fund his private celebration tonight instead of paying his rent. Under the strict default clauses I had established, I had the legal right to seize the commercial property, lock the doors, and initiate immediate foreclosure on Beverly's estate without any further notice or warning. I had held off on pulling the trigger out of a misplaced sense of compassion for them. But as I sat in the quiet luxury of my beautiful penthouse, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my sweet daughter in the next room, all of my lingering compassion evaporated into thin air completely. I pictured my mother standing in the mall security office, burdened by heavy designer shopping bags, rolling her eyes as my traumatized child sobbed into my shoulder. They did not deserve my protection. They did not deserve my silent grace. I held the needle poised perfectly against their balloon. The era of the scapegoat was finally over. I was going to ruin them completely. I walked into my sprawling open-concept kitchen and turned on the soft pendant lights hanging above the massive marble island. I retrieved my primary work laptop from my home office and carried it out to the island, setting it down next to a sleek espresso machine. I poured myself a glass of iced water, taking a long sip as I opened the laptop and authenticated my credentials. I bypassed the standard banking portals and logged directly into the highly secure management system used by my private equity firm. The screen illuminated with complex financial dashboards, scrolling tickers, and secure file directories. I navigated to the isolated portfolio containing the blind limited liability company I had created 7 months ago. The company that held the commercial lease for Derek's restaurant and the residential mortgage for Beverly's sprawling estate. I opened the master ledger. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. Derek was currently 90 days delinquent on his commercial lease payments. He had completely ignored the standard notices generated by the automated billing system, likely assuming the anonymous corporate landlord would be too slow to act before his grand opening generated new revenue. He had diverted all of his operating capital to fund the extravagant catering, the vintage champagne, and the expensive floral arrangements for his private VIP tasting event. He had prioritized the appearance of success over the actual foundational requirements of running a legitimate business. Meanwhile, my mother was 60 days behind on the aggressive repayment schedule outlined in her restructured residential mortgage. She was drowning in the high interest rates she had originally agreed to with the predatory lender rates that remained legally binding when my firm purchased the debt. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. I opened my photo gallery and stared at the most recent image. It was a picture I had taken earlier that afternoon, right after we returned to the apartment from the mall. Lily was sitting on the sofa, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, her eyes still red, and her face displaying a lingering, haunting exhaustion. I looked at that photograph for a full minute. I let the pain and terror of that afternoon wash over me one final time. I let the image of my mother holding those 6 luxury shopping bags burn into my memory. I let the echoes of Chelsea and Derek mocking my supposed poverty ring in my ears. I channeled every ounce of their cruelty, every ounce of their arrogance, and every ounce of their profound negligence into pure, unadulterated focus. I placed the phone beside the laptop and opened the legal directory within the limited liability company's portal. Derek's commercial lease, Beverly's mortgage assignment, the payment history, and every unanswered default notice were already organized in a secure case file. I reviewed the default and forfeiture clauses line by line, confirming that the missed payments gave my company the right to terminate the lease, secure the restaurant equipment, and accelerate the debt attached to Beverly's collateral. I did not activate any of those remedies that night. Instead, I created a final authorization packet for David, my lead corporate attorney. I attached the payment records, the original loan documents, the preserved notices, and the mall incident report Officer Higgins had given me. The report was not a financial instrument, but it documented the event that ended my willingness to extend further grace. My instructions were precise. David was to verify every filing, prepare the notices, place the commercial security team on standby, and coordinate with the financial institutions that controlled the pledged operating accounts. Nothing was to be filed, frozen, posted, or enforced without my direct verbal authorization. I scheduled a secure conference for 8 o'clock the following evening, when Derek's VIP tasting would be at its most visible. Until that call, every document would remain in draft status. I reviewed the packet one final time, then pressed send. A confirmation appeared on the screen: materials received, execution pending client authorization. That distinction mattered. I had prepared the trap, but I had not sprung it. Tomorrow night, one call from me would decide whether the grace period continued or ended forever. I slept only a few hours, but when morning came, the decision no longer felt fueled by anger. It felt administrative. The facts had not changed overnight. Lily had been left alone for 3 hours. Beverly had blamed her. Chelsea and Derek had defended the choice. The loan files still showed repeated defaults. The only thing that had changed was my willingness to protect the adults responsible. Before breakfast, I opened the secure parent portal for Lily's school. Beverly was listed as an approved pickup contact because I had once believed family access was automatically beneficial. I removed her name, changed the emergency authorization code, and added a written restriction stating that no member of my extended family could collect Lily without direct verbal confirmation from me. At 8:30, I walked Lily into the school rather than leaving her at the curb. Her hand remained wrapped tightly around 2 of my fingers. When we reached her classroom, she looked back toward the entrance twice. Her teacher, Ms. Patel, crouched beside her. "You are safe here," she said. "Your mom told us the new plan." I had already spoken privately with the principal and school counselor. I gave them the mall incident number, Officer Higgins' contact information, and a recent photograph of Beverly. The principal placed an alert on Lily's file and instructed the front desk not to confirm whether Lily was present if Beverly called. I also scheduled an appointment with a child therapist for later that week. Lily had not been physically injured, but safety was more than the absence of bruises. She deserved support before fear became a permanent part of how she moved through the world. When it was time for me to leave, Lily's eyes filled slightly. "I will be right here at pickup," I promised. "You will not forget." The question cut deeper than anything Beverly had said. I knelt and held both of Lily's hands. "I will never choose shopping work or anything else over coming back for you. If I am ever delayed, Ms. Patel and the front office will know exactly who is coming. You will never have to search for me alone." She studied my face, then nodded. Ms. Patel guided her toward the art table. I waited until Lily was seated beside 2 classmates before walking out. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for several minutes with both hands on the steering wheel. The legal strike planned for that evening was not the only boundary that mattered. Money could remove my family's leverage, but procedures would protect Lily from their access. I sent David a copy of the updated school restrictions and instructed him to prepare a formal notice prohibiting Beverly, Chelsea, and Derek from contacting Lily through caregiver, school staff, or third parties. At 10:15, David called through the encrypted line. "I have completed the legal review," he said. "The commercial lease default is fully documented. The restaurant ignored 3 payment notices and 2 cure demands. The security interest covers the installed fixtures and equipment purchased through the pledged operating account. And the house. The mortgage assignment and acceleration clause are valid. We can issue the demand and begin foreclosure proceedings. We cannot complete a residential foreclosure in one night, but we can restrict the pledged accounts, serve the notice, and begin the statutory process immediately." That distinction mattered. I did not need theatrical impossibilities. I needed consequences that could survive a courtroom. "Nothing moves before my call," I said. "Nothing," David confirmed. "The filings are prepared but unsigned. The bank instructions are queued. The property officers will wait 2 blocks from the restaurant until authorization. He paused. I also reviewed the mall report. Are you certain Lily is safe from further contact? She is now. Then we proceed only on the financial defaults, he said. The mall incident explains your decision, but the enforcement stands on the contracts, exactly as it should. Before ending the call, I asked David to walk me through the worst-case challenges. He explained that Derek could seek an emergency injunction, but the payment history and ignored cure notices made success unlikely. Beverly could dispute the acceleration amount, but not the existence of the lien or her signature on the collateral agreement. Any attempt to move equipment, empty accounts, or conceal records after service would strengthen our position. Document every interaction, I said. No intimidation, no unnecessary force, and no statements about the mall. The officers are enforcing a lease, not delivering a personal message. That is already in the protocol, David replied. The body cameras will begin before the team enters. An independent inventory specialist will record the premises. Employees will be given written instructions for collecting personal property and filing any wage claims. I appreciated the distinction. My family had used power carelessly, treating weaker people as acceptable collateral. I refused to repeat that pattern. The servers, cooks, cleaners, and vendors had not abandoned Lily. They had accepted jobs and contracts from a man who presented himself as solvent. Their rights had to be protected even while his control of the property ended. After the call, I reviewed the restaurant payroll reserve. There was enough money in the protected account to cover the most recent pay period. I authorized David to preserve those funds for employees, rather than applying them immediately to the debt. The remaining secured assets would still cover a substantial portion of the arrears. I also instructed my communications director to prepare a neutral statement. In case reporters contacted the holding company, the property owner had exercised contractual remedies following repeated uncured defaults. No further comment would be made during active proceedings. There would be no public mention of my relationship to Derek, unless corporate records made it unavoidable. Revenge wanted spectacle. Strategy required discipline. By the time I closed the file, every practical question had an answer. The family might scream accuse and rewrite history, but the documents would remain calm. Payment dates did not care who was the golden child. Security footage did not care who claimed to be misunderstood. Signed agreements did not become cruelty merely because enforcement finally reached the people who had ignored them. I spent the middle of the day at my firm's office. The glass conference rooms, financial models, and client calls were familiar enough to steady me. I approved a restructuring plan for a manufacturing company, reviewed an acquisition forecast, and corrected a junior analyst's assumptions about working capital. No one there treated me like a woman typing meaningless numbers in sweatpants. They trusted my judgment because I had earned that trust repeatedly. At lunch, my managing partner asked whether I wanted someone else to supervise the enforcement action. No, I said. It is personal, but the documents are objective. I want every step recorded and every instruction compliant. By 4 o'clock, David sent the final execution checklist. It listed the exact sequence: verbal authorization, electronic filing, restriction of pledged account service on the restaurant, physical inventory control, and delivery of the residential notice the following morning. I approved the sequence but left the authorization field blank. I picked Lily up 10 minutes early. She ran through the school doors and wrapped both arms around my waist. "You came," she said. "Always." We spent the early evening quietly. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup, helped her build a paper snowman, and let her choose 2 bedtime stories. She asked whether Grandma was angry. "Grandma made an unsafe choice," I said carefully. "My job is to make sure you are safe. You do not have to talk to anyone who makes you afraid. Is she coming here? No." That answer was true because I had security, not because I trusted Beverly's restraint. After Lily fell asleep, I checked every lock and activated the interior hallway cameras. Then I changed into comfortable clothes and carried my laptop to the kitchen island. The execution checklist waited on the screen. Beside it was the photograph of Lily taken after the mall, her eyes swollen from crying. At 7:45, David sent a message: "Team in position. Documents pending." At 7:50, the bank's enforcement officer confirmed that the pledged accounts could be restricted within minutes of authorization. At 7:55, the commercial security supervisor reported that his officers were parked near the restaurant and that the VIP event was already underway. I looked out over the city. Across town, Beverly, Chelsea, and Derek were raising glasses to a future financed by obligations they had chosen not to pay. They believed the evening belonged to them. The clock changed to 8. At precisely 8 o'clock, I picked up my smartphone. I bypassed my personal contacts and opened my encrypted work directory. I dialed the direct unlisted number of my lead corporate attorney. His name was David, a brilliant, ruthless legal mind who specialized in aggressive corporate acquisitions and asset liquidations. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Good evening, Melody." David said, the background noise of his high-rise office completely silent. "I assume you are calling to confirm the execution timeline we discussed yesterday." "Yes, David," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any hesitation. "The time has come. I want you to execute the default clauses on the Beverly Trust and the commercial lease for the luxury fusion restaurant venue immediately." The words felt incredibly powerful, leaving my lips carrying the weight of 34 years of suppressed anger and unjust treatment. "Understood," David responded calmly. "I have the prepared documents ready to file with the county clerk and the financial institutions. I am restricting the pledged operating accounts, escrow reserves, and trust-linked credit facilities right now. The unrelated personal funds will remain untouched." He paused for a fraction of a second. "The enforcement restrictions are active, Melody. They no longer have access to the capital pledged under the loan agreements." "Good," I said, staring out at the glittering city lights. "I want the physical enforcement deployed as well. I want the doors to the restaurant locked and the premises cleared. I do not want a single piece of equipment removed from that property. It all legally belongs to my limited liability company now. I want the foreclosure notices physically posted on my mother's residential estate by tomorrow morning. I have the commercial property security teams on standby near the restaurant venue," David confirmed. "I will give them the green light to move in. They will execute the breach of lease protocol and clear the building due to massive financial arrears. This is going to be a very public, messy eviction, Melody. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with maximum visibility?" I thought about Lily crying alone in the mall security office. I thought about Chelsea calling me a dramatic loser. I thought about Derek blaming my single mother status for my supposed poverty. I thought about my mother rolling her eyes and prioritizing designer coats over her own granddaughter's safety. I was deeply, profoundly committed to this course of action. "I want maximum visibility, David," I said, my tone dropping to an icy whisper. "Do it now. Tear it all down." "Consider it done," David replied, the finality in his voice signaling the end of their delusional reign. "I will monitor the situation and update you if there are any legal pushbacks, though. Given the airtight nature of these default clauses, they have absolutely no recourse. Have a pleasant evening, Melody." I ended the call and watched the authorization status on my laptop change from pending to active. The transformation was almost disappointingly quiet. There was no dramatic alarm, no visible explosion, only a sequence of green confirmation marks appearing beside actions that had taken months of legal preparation. The electronic filings were submitted first. Next, the pledged operating accounts and trust-linked credit facilities changed to restricted. The restaurant's merchant processor received notice that its settlement account was unavailable. The commercial security team acknowledged the order to take possession. Each step was time-stamped, recorded, and stored in the enforcement file. David sent one final message: all actions within contractual authority. Body cameras active. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I had not emptied ordinary checking accounts or taken money that was unrelated to the secured debt. I had not invented a punishment in the heat of the moment. I had withdrawn extensions, activated signed remedies, and stopped using my own company to shield them from defaults they had repeatedly ignored. Every consequence about to reach them had been written into agreements Beverly and Derek had signed while assuming they would never be held to the terms. The enforcement dashboard also showed a separate safeguard beside each action. Employee wages were excluded from the restrictions. Customer deposits for future reservations were identified for refund review. Vendor-owned equipment was marked, so it would not be mistaken for Derek's collateral. Those details mattered to me more than the speed of the shutdown. I had spent my career watching distressed companies collapse because leaders confused aggression with competence. The most effective restructurings were not the loudest. They separated legitimate obligations from vanity, preserved value where possible, and prevented the people at the top from shifting every loss onto workers beneath them. Derek had done the opposite. He had spent money on surfaces that photographed well while ignoring rent supplier balances, payroll risk, and operating reserves. Beverly had financed the illusion because it allowed her to feel powerful. Chelsea had marketed the illusion because it allowed her to feel admired. None of them had asked whether the underlying business could survive a single difficult week. The dashboard reached its final line. Property team cleared to enter at 21:15. That gave the vendors time to discover the account restrictions and gave the event enough time to expose how little real liquidity remained. I had not selected the timing merely to embarrass them. Executing while the restaurant was occupied ensured witnesses prevented quiet removal of assets and allowed the condition of the premises to be documented before Derek could alter records or equipment. Or, I saved the full authorization log to an encrypted archive. Whatever emotional confrontation came later, the action itself would remain defensible, chronological, and exact. I walked to the temperature-controlled wine cabinet and selected a bottle I had been saving since my promotion to senior managing partner. I had imagined opening it after a successful acquisition or the closing of a difficult fund. Instead, I opened it on the night I finally stopped financing my own mistreatment. The cork released with a soft pop. I poured a small measure into a crystal glass and carried it to the living room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glowed beneath a clear winter sky. Thousands of offices, apartments, restaurants, and vehicles moved through the darkness, unaware that one family's false hierarchy was beginning to collapse. I did not feel joy at the thought of Beverly losing her house. I felt relief that the house would no longer function as a throne from which she distributed approval. I did not feel pleasure at the thought of employees being removed from Derek's restaurant. David's team had already arranged for every worker to receive instructions about collecting personal belongings and filing wage claims against the protected operating funds. The people who had worked for Derek were not my targets. My target was the machinery of entitlement, the unpaid lease, the borrowed display of wealth, and the assumption that someone quieter would always absorb the damage. I sat on the velvet sofa and placed my phone on the coffee table. I switched it to silent mode, but left the screen facing upward. I wanted information without surrendering the peace of my home to their voices. A second notification appeared on the laptop. David had sent a secure live link from the restaurant's property cameras. The feed existed to document the condition of the premises before and during repossession. I connected the laptop to the large screen on the living room wall. The image opened on Derek's dining room, bright with brass lights, white linen, and borrowed celebration. I lifted the wine glass not in a toast to destruction, but to the end of my participation in their illusion. A soft chime sounded from my laptop. David had sent a secure link labeled Live Property Enforcement Feed. The restaurant's lease gave the property owner access to the building's security system, and the commercial enforcement team had activated the cameras for evidentiary purposes. I opened the feed and cast it onto the large screen built into the living room wall. The restaurant appeared in crisp, silent detail before the audio connected. Derek had transformed the space into a monument to borrowed confidence. Imported marble gleamed beneath custom brass lights. White linen covered every table. Servers in tailored black uniforms moved through the room with trays of miniature lobster tarts and champagne. A string quartet played near the bar while photographers captured Chelsea posing beside an arrangement of winter roses. When the sound came through, I heard Derek addressing the room. "Tonight is only a preview," he said, holding a microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. "Tomorrow we open our doors to the city, but this evening is for the people who believed in the vision before anyone else." Applause filled the dining room. Chelsea stood beside him in a silver designer dress, smiling as though she had built the kitchen with her own hands. Beverly occupied the most prominent table, accepting compliments from a city councilman and two local society reporters. One of the reporters asked how she had identified such a promising investment. Beverly gave a modest laugh. I have always understood people and timing. Derek had the talent. I simply had the resources and experience to help him realize his potential. She raised her glass while cameras flashed. At 8:12, the first fracture appeared. A server approached the service station and attempted to close a guest's promotional check through the point-of-sale terminal. The screen flashed red. He tried again. The same message appeared. He called over the floor manager, who tapped through several menus and restarted the device. Across the room, another terminal failed. The floor manager lifted his radio. All stations are rejecting transactions, he said. Is the network down? The bar manager answered that the network was active, but the merchant account was unavailable. Within 30 seconds, every terminal in the restaurant displayed the same notice: account access suspended. Derek noticed the cluster of employees near the service station and walked over, still wearing his public smile. Handle it quietly, he whispered. The floor manager showed him the screen. Derek's smile disappeared. He pulled a corporate card from his wallet and handed it over. Run this through the backup processor. The card was declined. He gave the manager a second card. Declined. A third. Declined. Chelsea approached, irritated that the staff problem was distracting Derek from the photographers. What is taking so long? Nothing, Derek said too quickly. A temporary payment issue. Before she could respond, the front doors opened and two delivery representatives entered, carrying clipboards. One wore the logo of the seafood distributor that had supplied the restaurant's premium oysters, tuna, and lobster. The other represented the wine wholesaler. The seafood representative walked directly to Derek. We need immediate settlement of the outstanding delivery balance. Derek glanced toward the guests. This is not the time. Speak to my office tomorrow. We were told the pledged account is restricted, the representative said. Your payment failed, and your credit facility has been suspended. Our company will not extend additional terms. The wine wholesaler handed Derek a printed notice. Same position from us. Tonight's inventory remains unpaid. Several guests close enough to hear stopped talking. A food critic lowered his fork. One of the society reporters suddenly turned on the recorder application on her phone. Derek drew both representatives toward the bar. You will be paid. I have investors in this room. Then one of them can transfer the funds now, the seafood representative replied. Derek looked across the dining room at Beverly. She had already taken out her phone. Her expression shifted as she tried to open her banking application. She entered her password, waited, and frowned. Then she tried again. The camera above the dining room caught the moment a warning filled her screen. Her face went pale. Chelsea hurried to her table. Mom, Derek needs the operating account. I cannot access it, Beverly whispered. What do you mean? It says the trust-linked credit line is restricted pending default enforcement. Chelsea stared at her. Fix it. Beverly refreshed the screen repeatedly as though persistence could reverse a legal action. I am trying. The councilman at her table quietly excused himself. The society reporters did not. Derek returned, his forehead shining with sweat. Beverly, I need a transfer right now. My accounts are restricted. You said you had reserves. I do. Then use them. I cannot get into them. The string quartet continued playing for another 30 seconds before the musicians noticed that nobody was listening. Their music slowed and stopped. The sudden absence of sound exposed every whisper in the dining room. A server carrying a tray of champagne paused when the wine representative said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "That product has not been paid for." Guests began setting their glasses down. Chelsea stepped into the center of the room and clapped her hands. Everyone, please continue enjoying the tasting. We are resolving a minor technical issue. A food critic raised an eyebrow. Is the issue technical or financial? Derek turned toward him. It is a banking error. The critic looked at the restricted terminals, the unpaid vendors, and Beverly's stricken face. Of course. At 9:15, the front doors opened again. Four uniformed commercial property officers entered with David and a licensed process server. The lead officer carried a sealed notice packet and wore a body camera. The room fell silent as they crossed the marble floor. Derek moved to intercept them. "This is a private event." David stopped several feet away. "The event is taking place on property controlled by Northbridge Asset Holdings. The commercial lease is in material default." Derek's face hardened. "That is impossible. We have an agreement with the landlord." "You have an agreement requiring monthly payment," David said. 3 consecutive payments were missed. Multiple notices were ignored. The owner has exercised the termination access and asset security provisions. The process server handed Derek the notice. Derek tore open the envelope, scanned the first page, and looked up in disbelief. Immediate possession. "You cannot do this during service. The lease permits immediate possession after uncured default," David replied. "The enforcement team is securing the premises now." Chelsea pushed through the gathering crowd. "Who authorized this?" David looked at her without expression. "The managing member of the holding company." "Who is that?" "You will find the name in the filing." Derek flipped to the signature page. His eyes stopped moving. Chelsea grabbed the document from him. "I watched her read my name once, then a second time. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out." Beverly rose so quickly that her chair struck the table behind her. "There has been a mistake." David handed her a separate envelope. "This notice concerns the accelerated debt secured by your residential property and the restrictions placed on the pledged accounts associated with that obligation." Beverly did not take it at first. David held it steady until she finally accepted the papers. Around them, guests began collecting coats. The mayor's representative left through a side door. The city councilman avoided eye contact. The critics remained long enough to photograph the enforcement notice being posted beside the entrance. Derek's panic turned to rage. "Nobody leaves!" he shouted. "This is a malicious stunt. We are opening tomorrow as planned." The lead property officer stepped forward. "The building is being cleared. Staff and guests must exit. No furniture, equipment, inventory records, or fixtures may be removed without written authorization from the property owner." Derek pointed toward the kitchen. "Those appliances belong to me." David opened the lease to the collateral schedule. They were purchased with encumbered operating funds and are subject to the landlord's security interest. A murmur moved through the room. Chelsea began pleading with guests. "Please do not post anything. This is a family misunderstanding." One of the reporters asked, "Is the owner who closed the restaurant a member of your family?" Chelsea looked at the signature page again. Her humiliation was answer enough. The officers moved table by table, guiding people toward the doors. Servers removed their aprons and left in silence. Vendors stood near the entrance until their inventory claims were documented. The quartet packed its instruments. Half-finished plates cooled beneath the brass lights Derek had bought instead of paying his rent. Beverly remained beside the main table, clutching the foreclosure notice with both hands. The woman who had presented herself minutes earlier as the brilliant financial force behind the restaurant now looked unable to understand a single line of the document. Derek made one last attempt to push past the officers toward the kitchen. The lead officer blocked him and ordered him outside. When he resisted, David warned him that further interference would be documented and referred to law enforcement. Derek finally stopped. At 9:27, the last guest stepped onto the sidewalk. The officers shut down the remaining terminals, photographed every room, and locked the restaurant's front doors. The process server taped the possession notice to the glass. Camera flashes reflected across the bold words, "Lease terminated, access prohibited." Derek stood outside in the freezing air, staring at my name on the documents. Chelsea was crying openly. Beverly kept pressing buttons on her phone, trying to reach accounts she no longer controlled. Then Derek pulled out his phone. On my screen, the secure feed remained open as his name illuminated the phone resting beside my wine glass. I did not have to wait very long. At exactly 8:32, the dark screen of my smartphone suddenly illuminated the dim space around it. The bright, glaring light cut through the shadows of the living room. A notification banner popped up displaying a missed call. The name on the screen read Derek. I simply stared at the illuminated rectangle. I could picture him standing in the middle of his chaotic dining room, his face flushed red with a mixture of profound embarrassment and rising panic. He was likely holding a declined corporate credit card in his hand, surrounded by confused VIP guests and angry vendors demanding immediate payment for the evening's extravagant catering. He was probably calling me to demand that I transfer some emergency funds to his account, assuming I would dutifully play the role of the reliable silent savior one more time. He still believed I was just a naive data entry clerk who could be bullied into handing over her meager savings to protect the family image. The phone screen went dark for a brief moment before immediately lighting up again. Another missed call notification appeared. This time the name on the screen read Chelsea. I leaned back against the plush velvet cushions, feeling a cold, satisfied smile spread across my face. Chelsea was undoubtedly calling to complain about the disastrous situation ruining her perfect night. I knew her patterns so well. She would want to scream at someone to vent her absolute frustration about the vendors refusing to serve the vintage champagne she had so heavily publicized. She would expect me to listen quietly, to offer sympathetic words, and to absorb her toxic energy so she could feel better about herself. The phone went dark, then instantly illuminated for a third time. The name on the display was Mom. Beverly was calling. The great financial mastermind was finally experiencing the terrifying reality of her own reckless decisions. Her trust accounts were frozen. Her commercial credit lines were locked. Her entire carefully constructed facade of endless wealth was disintegrating in front of the very local elites she had invited to witness her triumph. She was calling the scapegoat to fix the mess, completely unaware that the scapegoat had locked the doors and thrown away the key. For the next hour, the smartphone on my coffee table became a relentless, silent beacon of their mounting terror. It lit up over and over again in a frantic, unceasing rhythm. I watched the notifications cascade down the screen, a digital waterfall of pure desperation. Missed call from Derek. Missed call from Chelsea. Missed call from Mom. Missed call from Derek. Missed call from Mom. They were cycling through their contact lists, desperately trying to reach the one person they thought they could manipulate. The sheer volume of their attempts revealed the escalating severity of their situation. At 9:15, right on schedule, the notifications paused for a few short minutes. I knew exactly what was happening at that precise moment. My highly trained commercial property security guards had just walked through the front doors of the luxury fusion restaurant. They were loudly and publicly announcing the immediate clearance of the building due to a massive breach of lease, severe financial arrears, and an immediate foreclosure protocol. The VIP tasting event was officially dead. The public humiliation was absolute and irreversible. When the phone screen lit up again at 9:20, the nature of their communication had drastically shifted. They were no longer just calling, they were sending text messages. The first text came from my sister. The notification banner flashed across the top of the illuminated screen, displaying the opening lines of her frantic message. "What did you do? The bank says your name is on the LLC. Pick up." I stared at those words, absorbing the sheer, unfiltered panic vibrating through the text. The realization had finally hit them. In their frantic attempts to resolve the financial freeze, they had contacted the emergency lines of their banking institutions. A bewildered after-hours bank manager had likely looked up the ownership records of the blind limited liability company holding their debt. The bank manager had informed them that the anonymous corporate landlord evicting them from the restaurant and the ruthless entity freezing the mother's residential estate was actually me, the struggling single mother they had spent the entire previous evening mercilessly mocking. The profound satisfaction I felt in that moment was indescribable. Chelsea's arrogant, condescending worldview had just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She finally understood that the basic data entry clerk she loved to insult was actually the powerful multi-million-dollar private equity partner holding the literal deed to her entire existence. A few seconds later, another text message pushed Chelsea's notification down the screen. This one was from my mother. "Melody, please." The bank froze everything. We are locked out. The tone of Beverly's message was entirely different from her usual demanding authoritative posture. There were no commands. There were no insults about my lack of ambition. There was only raw, begging desperation. The word please was something my mother rarely used, and she certainly never used it when addressing me. She was standing on the sidewalk outside a locked restaurant, realizing that her massive suburban mansion was also caught in the crosshairs of my legal execution. She realized that she had absolutely no money, no leverage, and no power left. I did not answer a single one of their calls. I did not type a single letter in response to their frantic, begging text messages. I remained perfectly still on the comfortable sofa, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the digital numbers climb higher and higher. The red notification badge on my phone screen ticked steadily upward as the night wore on. 10 missed calls, 20 missed calls, 35 missed calls, 42 missed calls. I watched the numeric representation of their complete psychological breakdown with a clinical, detached fascination. They were entirely powerless, screaming into a digital void, unable to stop the crushing weight of the consequences descending upon them. The legal machinery I had set into motion was cold, efficient, and entirely merciless. By 11 o'clock, the number of missed calls had reached 50. I stood up from the sofa, leaving the glowing phone on the coffee table, and walked quietly down the hallway to check on my daughter one more time. Lily was still sleeping beautifully, her small chest rising and falling in a deep, restful rhythm. I gently adjusted the soft blanket over her shoulders, making sure she was warm and secure. I looked at her peaceful face and felt a renewed surge of absolute certainty. Every ruthless action I had taken tonight was completely justified. I was protecting my child from a toxic, dangerous family dynamic that prioritized superficial appearances over basic human safety. I was ensuring that Lily would never grow up feeling like a secondary disposable obligation. I was breaking a generational cycle of emotional abuse and financial manipulation, and I was doing it with absolute, unapologetic precision. I silently closed her bedroom door and walked back out into the expansive living area. The city below was growing slightly quieter as the late hour approached, but the tension inside my penthouse was steadily winding tighter. I checked the glowing screen of my smartphone one last time. The red notification badge displayed exactly 58 missed calls, 58 frantic attempts to reach the daughter they had treated as disposable only 24 hours earlier. The digital avenues were exhausted. I knew the next move would be physical. At 11:47, the intercom beside my security panel chimed. The night concierge appeared on the screen from the lobby desk, his expression professionally calm, but unmistakably concerned. "Ms. Melody, 3 visitors are demanding access to your floor," he said. They identified themselves as Beverly, Chelsea, and Derek. "Mr. Derek has been shouting at the staff. We can remove them from the property." The lobby camera showed them clustered near the elevators. Derek was pacing with his tie hanging loose. Chelsea was crying into her phone. Beverly stood beside 6 large luxury shopping bags she had apparently taken from the trunk of her car before entering the building. Even in a financial emergency, she had protected the purchases she valued more than my daughter. A security officer stepped into view behind them. Derek turned and jabbed a finger toward the elevator, insisting that he had a family right to come upstairs. The officer did not move. My building did not recognize family entitlement as an access credential. "Has anyone been drinking?" I asked. "The gentleman appears impaired, but he is responsive," the concierge said. "We have informed him that threatening staff or damaging property will result in police involvement." "Do not remove them yet," I said. "Send 2 security officers with them in the elevator. Keep the officers near the far end of the hallway outside the camera frame, and do not allow any of the visitors past my threshold." The concierge hesitated. "Are you certain?" "Yes. I am expecting them. Record the entire encounter, preserve the lobby audio, and flag the footage so it cannot be overwritten." I had already placed the legal folders on the console table near my entrance. The documents were not there for a dramatic reveal alone. If Beverly later claimed she had never received notice, or if Derek alleged that I threatened him the building's video and the process records would establish exactly what happened. A minute later, I received confirmation that the officers had searched the group for weapons and were escorting them upstairs. Beverly insisted on bringing the shopping bags, so the concierge placed them on a luggage cart. When the private elevator reached my floor, the officers unloaded the bags beside the doors and remained out of sight near the service corridor. I checked Lily's bedroom camera one last time. She was sleeping peacefully, her door secured, and the white noise machine masking sounds from the foyer. I locked the interior hallway leading to the bedrooms. Whatever happened at my front door would remain physically separated from her. I had not forgotten the 3 layers of security protecting my home. I had deliberately opened the final gate. They believed desperation had carried them to my door. In reality, they were entering a controlled space under surveillance with trained security close enough to intervene the moment Derek crossed a line. At 11:55, the private elevator doors opened. 3 familiar figures stumbled into the corridor. Derek saw my door cross the carpet in a rush and raised both fists. The violent pounding on my penthouse door began. I stood in my entrance foyer watching the heavy oak door vibrate slightly under the force of their fists. The thunderous noise echoed off the polished hardwood floors and high ceilings of my penthouse, but my heart rate remained entirely steady. I did not rush to unlatch the locks. I did not call out through the wood to ask who was there. I simply took a final, slow sip from my crystal glass, placed it carefully on a side table near the entryway, and let them pound for another 30 seconds. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their helplessness outside my threshold. I wanted them to realize that they were no longer in control of anything in this building. When the pounding finally paused, replaced by a muffled, desperate argument between my sister and my mother, I reached for the primary deadbolt. The metallic click was loud in the sudden silence of the corridor. I turned the secondary lock, slid back the security latch, and pulled the heavy oak door open. The hallway of my building was a masterpiece of modern architectural luxury, lined with soft sconce lighting, plush acoustic carpeting, and marble wall accents. Standing in the middle of this serene space were 3 people who looked like they had just survived a major natural disaster. Their arrogant, immaculate facades from the previous evening had been utterly obliterated. Derek was standing at the front of the group, his collar unbuttoned, his silk tie loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck. His jacket was wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it in pure, unadulterated terror. Sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool climate-controlled temperature of the building, and his face was a mottled, unhealthy shade of red. Beside him, Chelsea looked entirely unraveled. Her expensive mascara had run, leaving dark, messy smudges beneath her swollen red eyes. Her designer dress was rumpled, and she was clutching her clutch purse to her chest like a flotation device in a stormy sea. Beverly stood slightly behind them, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. Her carefully coiffed blonde hair was windblown and messy, her cashmere coat hanging limply from her trembling shoulders. The heavy gold jewelry on her wrists clinked together as her hands shook uncontrollably. For the first 2 seconds after the door swung open, none of them spoke. They had clearly prepared a barrage of frantic screams and demands, but the moment they looked past me, the words died in their throats. Their eyes widened in collective paralyzed shock as their gazes swept over the interior of my home. They were looking at a residence that surpassed anything they had ever stepped foot inside. They took in the soaring double-height ceilings, the private elevator entry, the expansive open floor plan, and the massive floor-to-ceiling windows framing the breathtaking panoramic views of the downtown skyline. They saw the custom Italian marble kitchen island, the museum-quality artwork hanging on the walls, and the sleek high-end furnishings bathed in ambient architectural lighting. They saw proof of wealth so vast and effortless that it rendered their suburban estate and modest luxury cars completely insignificant by comparison. I watched the color drain from Chelsea's face as her mind struggled to process the irreconcilable gap between her fantasy of my life and the reality staring her in the face. She had spent a decade convincing herself that I was a pathetic, low-level remote worker, typing into spreadsheets in a cramped, dingy apartment. She had built her entire sense of self-worth on the belief that she was superior to me in every conceivable way. Now, standing on the threshold of my multi-million-dollar penthouse, the illusion shattered into millions of sharp, painful shards. She looked at me then at the sprawling living room, then back at me, her lower lip trembling with a mixture of profound shock, jealousy, and dawning humiliation. Beverly clutched at the collar of her coat, her eyes darting frantically across the high-security entry panel, the private art pieces, and the sheer scale of the space. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her brain completely unable to compute how the daughter she had dismissed as a financial failure, the daughter she had treated like a charity case, was living in the apex of luxury. The realization that they had severely, catastrophically underestimated me hit them like a physical wall of cold air. It was Derek who broke the stunned silence, his overwhelming fear and embarrassment instantly mutating into explosive, unbridled rage. He took an aggressive step forward, breaching the threshold of my doorway, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "What the hell did you do?" Derek screamed, his voice cracking with desperation and echoing loudly down the quiet, carpeted hallway. "What kind of sick, twisted game are you playing, Melody? You have no right to do this to us. You have no right to ruin my business." He was practically hyperventilating, his eyes bulging as he stepped even closer into my space. My restaurant was full of people, he yelled, his voice rising to an unhinged pitch. The mayor was there. Food critics were sitting at the tables. We were 20 minutes into service, and your security thugs walked into my dining room like a SWAT team. They announced to the entire room that the lease was in default. They shut down the register systems. They forced everyone out onto the street in the middle of winter. Do you have any idea what you just did to my reputation? Do you have any idea how much money I just lost? He slammed his hand against the wooden doorframe, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling heavily of stale wine and stress. "Fix this right now," he roared, his voice shaking with pure, uncontrolled aggression. "You call whoever is running that fake company and tell them to lift the freeze. You call the bank and restore my line of credit. You have zero right to interfere with my business. You are just a bitter, jealous loser trying to ruin our lives because you cannot handle our success." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still on my polished hardwood floor, looking at his red, sweating face with complete detachment. The sheer irony of his words was almost comical. He was standing in my home screaming at me about rights and fairness, entirely unaware that every single piece of equipment in his kitchen, every chair in his dining room, and the very ground he was standing on belonged to me. Chelsea grabbed Derek's arm, her voice shrill and laced with hysterical panic as she looked at me. "Melody, please," she sobbed, her composure entirely gone. "The bank told us your name is on the LLC document. They said you own the commercial lease. They said you bought Mom's mortgage. Tell me that is a mistake. Tell me they made an error. How could you possibly own those things? Where did you get this place? What is going on here?" Beverly stepped forward, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. Her eyes were wide with a terrifying blend of horror and disbelief as she stared at me. "Melody, sweetie," she stammered, her usual condescending authority replaced by raw, naked dread. "The bank restricted the trust-linked accounts and credit lines. Every card connected to them was declined at the venue. I cannot access any of the money pledged under the loan. The lawyer said my house is in foreclosure proceedings. Please tell me this is a nightmare. Tell me you did not do this to your own family." They stood before me in the soft light of my luxury hallway. Three broken, desperate people demanding answers from the scapegoat they had spent 34 years stepping on. The tension in the corridor reached a suffocating, unbearable peak as they waited for me to speak, terrified of the truth they were finally beginning to comprehend. I did not flinch at all. I stood perfectly still, letting Derek's frantic screaming wash over me. His breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. Instead, I simply turned my back on him. I walked away from the open doorway, and moved slowly toward a sleek console table positioned in the grand foyer of my penthouse. I could hear Chelsea gasping behind him as she realized I was unbothered by their presence. Resting on the smooth marble surface of the console table was a thick, meticulously organized stack of printed legal documents. I had prepared them earlier that afternoon, anticipating this exact midnight confrontation. The documents were printed on heavy premium legal paper, bound together in sleek black folders. I turned my body back around and walked slowly toward the threshold where they remained frozen in suspended panic. I stopped exactly 1 foot away from Derek. His chest was still heaving, but the loud, aggressive bluster had evaporated from his eyes, replaced by a deep, primal fear. I lifted the top folder from the stack and held it out toward him. My hand was perfectly steady. He stared at the black folder for a long moment before slowly, hesitantly reaching out to take it. His cold fingers were trembling so violently that the thick paper rustled loudly in the quiet, elegant corridor. "Open it, Derek," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Read the first page." Derek fumbled with the cover, his shaking hands struggling to grip the heavy cardstock. He managed to flip it open, and his bloodshot eyes darted rapidly across the bold, uncompromising legal text. I watched the last remaining drop of color drain completely out of his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The document in his hand was the official notice of commercial lease default, complete with the immediate eviction mandate and asset seizure authorization. At the very bottom of the page, signed in crisp blue ink, was my name listed clearly as the sole managing partner of the holding company. "You sat at my mother's dining table last night and proudly told me that I do not understand how business works, Derek," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the hallway. "You mocked my career. You called me a loser. You told me I had no idea how the real world operates." I stepped 1 inch closer to him, locking my eyes onto his terrified, wide gaze. "I understand perfectly how business works. I understand perfectly that you have missed 3 consecutive rent payments to my limited liability company. I understand that you diverted your operating capital to buy vintage champagne for a meaningless tasting event instead of paying your legal debts. I understand that you are a terrible, incompetent businessman who relied entirely on a mismanaged trust fund to float your massive ego." I paused, letting the absolute reality of his failure sink deep into his bones. "You are evicted, Derek. You are locked out. Every piece of imported Italian marble, every custom brass light fixture, and every single appliance inside that restaurant now legally belongs to me to offset your massive financial arrears. You own absolutely nothing." The folders slipped from Derek's trembling hands and crashed onto the floor, scattering the pristine legal documents across the plush acoustic carpeting of the hallway. He let out a strange, suffocated sound, staggering backward until his shoulders hit the wall of the corridor. Chelsea let out a sharp, hysterical scream. She dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the scattered papers, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Her hands moved desperately, flipping through the pages of the commercial lease default before she uncovered the second folder I had included in the stack. This folder contained the accelerated foreclosure notices for Beverly's residential estate. Chelsea stared at the bold print, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to comprehend the words on the page. "Mom," Chelsea gasped, looking up from the floor with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Mom, the house. Melody owns the mortgage on the house. The documents say it is in immediate foreclosure. The bank is going to take the house." Beverly had been standing in a state of catatonic shock, staring blankly at the sprawling luxury of my penthouse. The sound of Chelsea's panicked voice snapped her back to the brutal reality of the moment. Beverly stumbled forward, nearly tripping over her own expensive designer boots. She snatched the foreclosure documents directly out of Chelsea's hands, bringing the papers close to her face, as if proximity might somehow change the words printed on the page. Her eyes frantically tracked back and forth across the legal text, reading the acceleration clause and the demand for immediate full repayment of her massive predatory commercial loan. The realization hit her with devastating, undeniable force. She realized that her sprawling suburban mansion, the ultimate symbol of her wealth and status, was also serving as direct collateral for Derek's failed restaurant venture. She realized that she was entirely ruined. Beverly dropped the papers, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She burst into frantic, uncontrollable tears. The polished, arrogant matriarch who had scoffed at my daughter's terror just 24 hours ago was completely gone. In her place was a broken, terrified woman drowning in the absolute certainty of her own financial destruction. Melody, you cannot do this, Beverly wailed, her voice cracking as thick black streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks. You cannot take my home. Where will I live? What will I do? You cannot do this to us. I am your mother. We are family. The word family hung in the air, echoing off the marble accents of the luxurious corridor. It was a word they had consistently weaponized against me for decades, using it to demand my compliance, my silence, and my endless financial sacrifice. They only ever invoked the concept of family when they needed to extract something from me or when they needed to excuse their own horrific, abusive behavior. I looked at my mother, watching her sob hysterically as the reality of her new, impoverished existence crashed down upon her. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no obligation. The maternal instinct that had driven me to protect my terrified 5-year-old daughter roared through my chest, burning away the last fragile remnants of my past conditioning. I stepped forward, crossing the threshold of my penthouse and moving directly into the hallway. I stood incredibly close to my mother, forcing her to look me straight in the eyes. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I let my tone drop into a cold, lethal whisper that carried more power than any scream ever could. Family. I repeated the word, tasting like ash on my tongue. Family does not leave a 5-year-old child completely alone in a crowded mall for 3 agonizing hours. Family does not abandon a little girl on a public bench to wander through a sea of strangers terrified and sobbing just to buy designer shoes. Family does not look at a traumatized child and call her a dramatic inconvenience. Beverly flinched violently, physically recoiling from the absolute unyielding coldness in my eyes. I kept my gaze locked onto hers, refusing to let her look away. You sat at your extravagant dining table last night, wrapped in your expensive cashmere, and you proudly celebrated a fraudulent empire. I continued, my voice steady, precise, and entirely devoid of mercy. You allowed your golden child and your arrogant son-in-law to mock my career, insult my status as a single mother, and demean the very life I built to protect myself from your toxicity. You thought you held all the power. You thought you could treat my daughter and me as disposable, worthless garbage without ever facing a single consequence. You prioritized your golden child's flashy lifestyle over my daughter's basic safety. You chose luxury children's coats over Lily's life. I paused, letting the absolute truth of my words sink deep into the core of her shattered reality. I watched her shoulders shake with violent, heavy sobs, her pristine cashmere coat trembling. I watched Chelsea crying hysterically on the floor, her manicured fingers hopelessly clutching the useless, scattered legal documents that outlined her absolute destruction. I watched Derek staring blankly at the marble wall, completely broken by the sudden catastrophic end of his unearned arrogance and his fake restaurant empire. The silence in the hallway was heavy, punctuated only by their pathetic weeping. They had nothing left. They had no wealth, no status, no business, and no home. I took one final slow step back, retreating into the sanctuary of my secure, luxurious penthouse. I looked at the three of them one last time, cementing the image of their complete and total ruin in my memory forever. Now I whispered, delivering the final, devastating blow with absolute precision as my hand rested on the brass doorknob. Now you have neither of them. Chelsea, realizing the absolute finality in my voice, scrambled to her feet. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve as she tried one final desperate manipulation. Melody, Please think about your nephews. Chelsea sobbed, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. The holidays are just a few days away. If you do this, my boys will have absolutely nothing. You are going to ruin their Christmas. You are going to leave innocent children homeless and destitute because you are angry at us. I brushed her hand off my arm, feeling nothing but a profound, unyielding disgust. I pointed a steady finger at the floor near the elevator doors. Resting on the plush carpeting were the 6 massive high-end shopping bags from the luxury children's boutiques. Beverly had brought them with her in her blind panic, likely grabbing them from the trunk of her car out of pure habit. "Sell the luxury gifts, Chelsea," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent hallway. "You will definitely need the cash for your mother's new apartment deposit." I stepped backward, returning to the safe, peaceful sanctuary of my home. I placed my hand on the heavy brass handle of the solid oak door. I did not say goodbye. I simply pushed the door shut, severing their frantic, hysterical wailing with a loud final click. I engaged the deadbolts and walked to my bedroom, falling into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. 3 months later, the former luxury fusion restaurant reopened under a different name. The imported marble remained, but the oversized brass logo Derek had installed above the entrance was removed. In its place hung a simple sign for Harbor and Grain, a bakery and daytime cafe operated by Elena Ruiz, one of my firm's longtime clients. Elena had spent 15 years building a respected wholesale bread business from a rented commercial kitchen. She understood payroll, inventory margins, and the difference between a beautiful room and a sustainable company. More importantly, she treated every employee with dignity. My holding company did not give her the property as an act of charity. We structured a fair lease with realistic payments, a modest renovation allowance, and a purchase option she could earn over time. The restaurant equipment Derek had left behind was sold or repurposed. The enormous wine display became a wall of bread racks. The private dining room was converted into a teaching kitchen where Elena offered weekend baking classes for teenagers aging out of foster care. On opening morning, there were no politicians' velvet ropes or photographers hired to manufacture importance. There was a line of neighborhood residents waiting in the cold for fresh bread. Elena stood behind the counter with flour on her sleeve, thanking each customer by name. By noon, the first day's inventory was nearly sold out. I took Lily there after school the following week. Elena gave her a small apron and invited her to decorate a cinnamon roll. Lily concentrated seriously, placing berries around the icing in a crooked circle. When she finished, Elena declared it the most important item in the bakery. Lily smiled in a way I had not seen since before the mall. Her recovery had not been immediate. For several weeks, crowded stores frightened her. She refused to let go of my hand in public and became anxious whenever I stepped into another room. I did not tell her to stop overreacting. I did not insist that she was fine because nothing worse had happened. I found a child therapist who specialized in separation trauma, adjusted my schedule, and gave her the time she needed to feel safe again. I also made the boundaries permanent. The morning after the confrontation, I removed Beverly from every school pickup list, medical authorization form, and emergency contact record connected to Lily. I gave the school a copy of the mall incident report and written instructions that no member of my extended family was permitted to collect or approach her without my direct approval. My building's security department blocked their visitor access. David prepared a formal no-contact notice, warning that any attempt to reach Lily through her school activities or caregivers would be documented. Beverly called from new numbers for 2 weeks. Her messages moved through the predictable stages of manipulation. First came outrage. She accused me of stealing her home and destroying the family. Then came denial. She said Lily had never truly been in danger and claimed the security guard had exaggerated the footage. After that came bargaining. She promised to apologize if I stopped the foreclosure and restored her accounts. Finally came self-pity. She described herself as an elderly mother abandoned by the daughter she had sacrificed everything to raise. I saved every message and answered none of them. The foreclosure process followed the agreements Beverly had signed. My company did not seize more than it was legally owed. The estate was sold, the secured balance and enforcement expenses were paid, and the remaining equity was released to her. The amount left was enough for a modest apartment if she budgeted carefully. It was not enough to preserve the illusion of unlimited wealth. Chelsea was furious when she learned that Beverly still had some money. She expected her mother to use every remaining dollar to maintain Chelsea's household. Beverly expected Chelsea to take her in. Their alliance, which had always depended on money flowing in one direction, fractured within days. Chelsea and Derek moved into a smaller rental after losing access to the restaurant's operating accounts and failing to qualify for another commercial loan. Derek blamed Beverly for choosing the original predatory financing. Beverly blamed Derek for missing the payments. Chelsea blamed both of them for humiliating her in front of the city's social circle. The 6 luxury shopping bags became their first practical lesson in liquidation. Chelsea returned some items, sold others online, and used the proceeds for deposits, moving costs, and overdue bills. The limited edition coats that Beverly had considered more urgent than Lily's safety never appeared in the carefully planned holiday photographs. Derek attempted to present the closure as a temporary dispute with an unreasonable landlord. That story collapsed when the public filings revealed 3 missed lease payments, multiple notices, and the security interest attached to the equipment. The food critics who had attended the tasting wrote little about the menu. They wrote instead about a restaurant that had staged luxury before establishing solvency. "He threatened to sue me." David responded with the complete payment history, signed loan documents, and video of Derek trying to obstruct the enforcement officers. No lawsuit was filed. Chelsea tried a different strategy. She sent me long messages about her sons, insisting that the boys were innocent and should not lose their relationship with their cousin. I agreed that children were innocent. I also understood that access to Lily could not be used as a path back into my life. I offered one controlled option: the cousins could meet at a public family activity center, with a professional supervisor, provided neither Beverly nor Derek attended, and Chelsea signed clear conduct rules. Chelsea rejected the arrangement because she considered supervision insulting. That decision told me the request had never truly been about the children. My ex-husband, whom my family had repeatedly called a deadbeat, learned about the incident through the school's emergency update. Our marriage had ended because we were incompatible, not because he had abandoned Lily. He lived in another state and maintained scheduled contact with her. When I explained what had happened, he did not attack me or turn the event into a fight about our past. He asked what Lily needed, contributed to the therapy costs, and updated his travel plans so he could spend additional time with her during the winter break. The contrast was difficult to ignore. The person my family used as an insult responded to Lily's fear with concern. The people who called themselves her devoted relatives responded with excuses. By early spring, Lily could walk through a shopping center again without gripping my hand until her fingers hurt. We started small. First, a quiet neighborhood market, then the children's section of a bookstore. Eventually, we returned to a different mall to choose a birthday gift for one of her classmates. Before entering, I knelt beside her in the parking garage and reviewed our safety plan. She knew my phone number, the names of safe employees to approach, and the meeting point we would use if we became separated. More importantly, she knew I would never intentionally leave her behind. Halfway through the visit, she stopped beside a carousel. I felt her body tense. "We can go," I told her. She studied the painted horses for several seconds. Then she shook her head. "Can we ride together?" We climbed onto the same platform. Lily chose a white horse with a blue saddle, and I stood beside her with one hand around her waist. As the carousel began to turn, holiday lights from months earlier seemed to flicker in my memory. The security office, the melted lollipop, Beverly's shopping bags, and Lily's terrified face. But the memory did not control the moment. Lily laughed when the horse rose, and I laughed with her. We completed 2 full rides. When we stepped off, she looked back at the carousel without fear. That Saturday, we met Elena and her teenage daughter at the park near the river. Maria joined us with coffee, and Lily ran between the playground and a picnic table covered with pastries from Harbor and Grain. The people around us were not connected by obligation or shared last names. They were people who had shown up, protected boundaries, and treated my child's feelings as real. My phone remained quiet in my bag. There were no demands, no insults, and no emergency caused by someone else's reckless spending. For the first time, peace did not feel like the temporary pause before another family crisis. It felt permanent. Lily climbed onto the bench beside me and rested her head against my shoulder. "Are these our people?" she asked, looking at Maria Elena and the children laughing near the swings. I kissed the top of her curls. "Yes," I said. "These are our people." She considered that answer and smiled. Across the river, the city continued moving, indifferent to the fact that one toxic family structure had finally ended. I no longer needed Beverly to understand what she had done. I no longer needed Chelsea to admit that she had been cruel, or Derek to recognize that arrogance had destroyed his business. Their understanding was not required for my boundary to remain valid. The most important result was sitting beside me, safe and unafraid. I had once believed protecting my family meant absorbing the consequences of their choices. Now I understood that protecting my real family meant refusing to do so. I had not destroyed their lives. I had stopped using my money, silence, and labor to prevent their decisions from reaching them. Lily jumped down from the bench and ran back toward the playground. I watched her go, surrounded by the family we had chosen, and felt no urge to look behind me. Wealth and status are empty concepts if they are built on a foundation of arrogance and cruelty. I built my success in silence, not for revenge, but for security. In the end, that independence became the shield that protected my daughter from a lifetime of being treated as an afterthought. True family is not determined by shared DNA. It is defined by the people who show up, who protect you, and who celebrate your authentic self without conditions. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, or if you have ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, please share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to join a community of people who understand that finding your true worth sometimes means leaving your past behind. Thank you for listening to my journey.